90 feet beneath the Pacific, off the southern tip of Japan, there is a structure with right angles, staircases, and carved channels that nature does not build. The geologist who formally documented it in 1987 has never once been invited back by his own government to study it. Ask yourself why. In 1986, a dive instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was scouting waters off Yonaguni Island when he descended onto something that should not have been there. Flat terrace platforms, walls meeting at precise 90-degree angles. A formation so geometric, so deliberate in its arrangement, that he surfaced and told anyone who would listen that the ocean floor had architecture on it. Most dismissed him. One man did not. Masaaki Kimura was a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, and when he entered those waters in 1987, he brought instruments, documentation, and decades of professional credibility with him. What he produced was not speculation, it was a formal scientific record. He cataloged the site in precise detail, a main terrace structure approximately 150 meters long and 40 meters wide, rising 27 meters from the seafloor. Straight walls, a feature he identified as a staircase, carved parallel channels running at consistent depths. Kimura's conclusion was that the formation bore the hallmarks of human construction, and he proposed that it dated to before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were dramatically lower and that coastline was still above water. That would place its origins somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, predating every accepted timeline for organized civilization in the region. The implications were enormous. If Kimura was right, the story of human civilization in the Pacific had to be rewritten, and that is precisely when the doors began to close. Japanese government-funded archaeological surveys of the region were organized in the years that followed, and Kimura was excluded from every single one of them. Not discredited publicly, not formally refuted with counter-evidence, simply left out. The surveys that did proceed produced findings that leaned heavily toward a natural formation explanation, citing a local rock type known to fracture along clean lines. Those findings were circulated widely. Kimura's documented measurements and structural analysis were not. His work was published in academic journals, presented at international conferences, and largely ignored by the institutions with the budget and authority to follow up on it. What they left behind is a paper trail that tells its own story. The government commissioned reports reference the Yonaguni Monument without once engaging substantively with Kimura's specific findings. They do not explain the parallel channels. They do not address the consistent angular geometry. They describe the site in the broadest geological terms and move on. For a structure sitting in Japanese territorial waters, formally documented by a Japanese scientist at a Japanese university, the official record is remarkable in what it omits. The monument is still there. The questions Kimura raised in 1987 have never been answered. They have only been buried. What Masaaki Kimura documented at Yonaguni was not ambiguous. After years of diving the site, the University of the Ryukyus professor produced a systematic record of what lay 90 feet beneath the surface off the coast of Okinawa. Terraced platforms, right angles, a processional road running along the base of the main structure, channels carved with consistent width and depth, a formation he labeled the turtle, resembling a stylized animal figure. Kimura cataloged over 40 individual architectural features and published his findings through legitimate academic channels. His conclusion was measured, careful, and catastrophic for the official record. He estimated the structure was last above sea level somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, placing its construction before the end of the last ice age, before any civilization was supposed to exist in that part of the Pacific. The geological community did not refute him point by point. They simply moved on without him. The Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs controls what gets designated, what gets funded, and what gets buried in paperwork. After Kimura's initial documentation, government-funded surveys of the Yonaguni region were organized, staffed, and completed without him. Not once, not as an oversight, repeatedly. The man who had more dive hours on the structure than anyone alive, who had the most comprehensive documentation of its features, who had staked his professional reputation on its study, was left off every official team. The surveys that followed produced conclusions that aligned neatly with the preferred narrative. natural formation, tectonic activity, erosion patterns. These reports were brief, their methodology unpublished in full, their raw data never made publicly available. What they found, or chose not to find, remains institutionally protected. What makes the exclusion harder to dismiss is the nature of the features themselves. Natural sandstone does fracture along straight lines. Erosion can produce steps. Individual anomalies can be explained away. But Kimura's documentation does not rest on one anomaly. It rests on the systematic repetition of architectural logic. The channels maintain consistent depth ratios. The terracing follows a pattern that would require selective erosion of extraordinary precision. The twin stone pillars found on the site stand in a relationship to the main platform that mirrors construction logic found in ancient megalithic sites on land. Marine geologist Robert Schoch, who initially believed the structure was natural, revised his position after his own dives. He concluded that at minimum, a natural formation had been modified by human hands. Two independent researchers, different methodologies, same site, convergent conclusions. Still no invitation from Tokyo. There is a layer beneath the archaeology that the official record refuses to touch. Oral traditions across Okinawa and the surrounding Ryukyu island chain carry references to a sunken land, a place of ancestors that the sea consumed. These accounts were never integrated into the geological survey reports. They were treated as folklore, which is precisely how institutions dispose of inconvenient data that lacks a filing category. Kimura himself noted the correlation between these traditions and the estimated submersion timeline. A culture that watched land disappear beneath rising post-glacial seas would remember it. They always do. The question is not whether people remembered. The question is why that memory was never considered evidence. By the mid-2000s, the Yonaguni Monument had become internationally known, featured in documentaries, debated in academic journals, and visited by divers from across the world. The Japanese government's response to this attention was not renewed investigation. It was classification. The site was designated a protected marine area, which sounds like preservation but functions as access control. Independent researchers now require permits. Permit applications route through the same cultural affairs bureaucracy that excluded Kimura from the beginning. The structure sits exactly where it always has, 90 feet down, not going anywhere. The staircases are still there, the channels are still there, the road is still there, and the man who documented all of it has spent decades watching other people draw conclusions about a place they visited once, briefly, with institutional permission and institutional expectations. That is not science. That is a managed outcome. What Masaaki Kimura documented at Yonaguni was not ambiguous. The structure sits at roughly 90 feet below the current sea surface, and at the end of the last ice age, that depth was dry land. The terrace platforms, the precise right angles, the carved channels running in parallel lines, the staircase formations ascending in deliberate increments. These are not features geology produces on its own. Natural sandstone fractures along irregular plains. It does not build staircases. Kimura spent years mapping the site, cataloging tool marks, cross-referencing the architecture against known ancient construction techniques, and arriving at a date range that placed human activity there somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago. That predates the accepted timeline of organized civilization by several thousand years. It predates Mesopotamia. It predates the pyramids. And the Japanese government, once the implications were fully understood, made certain that no state-funded research team would ever hand Kimura a dive permit again. The exclusion was not accidental, and it was not administrative. Funding was redirected. Official surveys were commissioned and led by geologists whose conclusions aligned with natural formation theory before the dives were even completed. The academic journals that had initially shown interest went quiet. The pattern is familiar to anyone who has watched inconvenient discoveries get absorbed and neutralized. They do not always destroy the evidence. Sometimes they simply surround it with enough official noise that the original finding gets buried under layers of credentialed dismissal. Kimura's documentation still exists. His measurements are still on record. The structure is still down there, unchanged, carrying right angles that water and time did not make. What changed was who was allowed to ask questions about it. What this means, if the pre-Ice Age construction date holds, is that an organized society capable of large-scale stone architecture existed in the Pacific long before history says it should have. That rewrites coastal settlement patterns. It rewrites the migration timelines. It raises the possibility that the Ice Age sea level rise did not just flood empty coastlines, it buried cities. Yonaguni may not be the only one. It may simply be the one that surfaced in the wrong government's waters at the wrong moment, documented by a man they could not discredit, so instead they made sure he could never finish his work. What do you believe is underneath the water off Okinawa, and how many other sites like it exist that no survey team has ever been authorized to reach? Leave your theory in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of conversation they would prefer never happened. Subscribe to What They Buried, because every week we dig up another story they hoped you would never find.